Wow, this is a big guy. He'll be up here someday. Thank you very much, Carson. Carson Carpenter, thank you.
We are the common cause, we are the common people, and we only put America first. Welcome back to The Common Cause. My name is Carson Carpenter, and it's a pleasure to have you here today on this beautiful Wednesday, June 3rd, 2026. We have an amazing run of show for you up ahead. We are talking about election night in America from last night with the primary elections in Iowa, New Jersey, Montana, California. A lot of backlash, a lot of repercussions nationwide there. We are also talking about the Iran war, how it has still not been settled. There has been no ground made in the Middle East once again, sadly for our country's sake. And then we are also talking about how we have a war at home with the homeless, the industrial complex that has been built up there, especially in California and the West Coast states, and how we could reallocate funds from a lot of evangelical churches in America, which are being funded by foreign agents, to reallocate money for the homeless. This is the wrap up. This is the report for this day today, and it's great to be back with you. And so just to start out, we are starting to do this show a lot more consistently again. We are going to have an episode every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We are looking at doing 2 interviews a week on Monday and Friday. And Wednesday, we want it to be a solo show focusing on the issues that impact us the most, because this show is about Jesus first and America only. That is our mission. That is our goal. And it's about to show the common will of the common man in America once again. So thank you again for tuning in, and it's an honor. But let's dive right in. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below. I'd love to respond to some of your comments in future episodes and even answer questions in interviews like this one this Friday, which we have with Riley Nemi, who is a viral conservative influencer who has been targeted and attacked recently many, many times. He's been assaulted. He's had paint dumped on him. So that is what is coming up later this week, and I want to hear from you about it. But going into election night, we thought, okay, is this going to be a red wave? Is this going to be a blue tsunami? And it turned out to be a mix of both, and it turned out to be a mix of none, which is really interesting. And I would like to start first in Iowa with Zach Lane and Randy Feenstra. This was a race that was hotly contested. It was split multiple ways. There was a third candidate that was a type of independent who was basically irrelevant in this election, who stole 15% of the vote, which is something in the primaries that we'll see in California is a problem with our current democracy in this country, is that random people, random bums off the street can steal up a swath of the vote that is going to affect the actual front runners that are going to change and actually enact change for the people of their states. So in this election, we had Zach Lane, who was endorsed by the Maha Coalition, that was endorsed by Turning Point Action. He outperformed what everybody thought. He was actually somebody who was looked at as a dark horse candidate who didn't even have a shot at winning the Iowa gubernatorial race in the primary. And then you had Randy Feenstra, who essentially was just as much of a nobody as Zach Lane, but then in the recent week and a half has really jumped up because of President Trump's endorsement of him. And this is where we're going to dive in, because this is a really interesting dynamic that plays a lot into other races and other feuds that we have seen with the Trump administration. So let me play it all out for you. Zach Lane was endorsed by Turning Point Action, the Maha Coalition, and a bunch of other conservative congressmen, senators, stuff of that sort, state legislators in Iowa. And Randy Feenstra was endorsed by Donald Trump. Now, you're probably asking, how come they were split on the endorsements? And that's a question I have as well. I don't live in Iowa, so I don't know all of the dynamics there. But it's really interesting to think back of the feuds that we've seen in 2025 and early 2026, where you see people like Thomas Massie outed, Marjorie Taylor Greene outed, among others, by this administration if they don't show complete loyalty to the Trump regime. And with this dynamic in Iowa, it just makes it even more complicated. Do you have to show complete loyalty to the Trump agenda or do you not? And this was something that just felt like an insider bet almost of RFK's coalition going up against Trump's coalition. And behind the scenes in Washington, they're betting on Kalshi about to see who can win and who actually is going to control Iowa. And this is what it feels like for most Americans in the country, is it feels like an insider game in Washington that's betting on their local politics to change the dynamic of where they live. This is what it feels like in everyday living in America at this point. And this is just another example. And the only people that don't get the repercussions of this is what it seems like is people who are on the inside of this administration. It's about the insiders, not the outsiders. And so this creates an interesting dynamic where people in the past have had this similar dynamic with Trump, especially Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Zach Lane is not going to feel any of the repercussions that these other people had to feel. And now that's obviously in a different mindset because one's a legislative agenda and one's not. But how come we see no consistency with the Trump loyalty agenda? We don't see any consistency with people that actually enacted change for the Republican agenda in Congress for 8+ years, 10+ years, and people even longer in our Congress. But then the one time that they don't show loyalty to Trump, even though they vote with him 91% of the time, they're outed. They're thrown out of the MAGA agenda, just like trash into the wind. But then you had the dynamic of last night, where you can endorse the primary opponent of somebody and be in the administration and face none of the repercussions of it because it's Iowa. I think that's what it comes down to, is they think it's irrelevant. It's Iowa. And in that election, there was 250,000 votes cast, so does it really mean much? But then when it's the legislative agenda of Trump in Congress and he's wanting to block the agenda of the administration, oh, then it's you can't stand up to Trump in any way. You can't stand up to him at all. And so because he had a scapegoat, it was because of the Epstein files. It's because there was no transparency there. But then in this situation, when it's something that's lower stakes, you can abandon the Trump loyalty. And this is something that the left, the Democrats, won't even overanalyze or won't even talk about on the show on CNN that they have that stupid panel on with Adam Mockler. It's so relevant, I don't even know the name of it. And when they talk about stuff like this, they say, well, Trump has this overarching loyalty that he needs 100% loyalty at all times. Well, last night was an example of not having that, and actually shows a broader example of it's the insiders are still controlling Washington. Trump is not an outsider. He is the ultimate insider that beckoned Washington by pretending he was an outsider. And I think people in the MAGA agenda have to admit that at this point. I don't think that's a necessarily knock on Trump. I think a lot of other politicians would be the same way if they ran for president, like Gavin Newsom and J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. They would all play that same card. And it was the right place in the right time. So that was my take on that race, which is something that's really interesting, is that you have to show 100% loyalty to Trump, but only when the time's right. And I think this plays a big example to Massie, to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and these other people that have been ousted because of Trump, is that they were a product of their time. They were a product of the moment. And if they weren't going to beckon, if they weren't going to cave in that moment, the loyalty you showed to Trump for the last 10 years meant nothing. And so I wish the best to Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all of those other ones, because there's people that are able to turn against the Trump agenda and face no repercussions of it. So that was my biggest take from the elections last night, was that interesting little almost chip inside of Trump's mind of what their thought process is in Washington. And Washington hates you. Washington truly hates you to their core. As you can see, there was two parties that are Trump aligned, endorsed the opponent, and then days before the election, to make it way closer, he endorses Randy Feenstra for the governor's race. It's unbelievable. But I think that's enough talking about the Iowa gubernatorial race, because there was a bigger race last night out in California on the West Coast, which was Steve Hilton, Chad Bianco, Tom Steyer, Javier Becerra, and Matt Mahan, Katie Porter, all of the other ones. There was even Barack Obama in the election. There was even Clavicular in the election. There was 60 plus people that were able to be on the ballot in California. And you have all these libtards out there that say, oh, we need to protect democracy. Yeah, let's split up the vote 60 different ways, and 58 of the candidates have no shot at winning. Yeah, that's the most disgusting abuse of democracy. That's the illusion of democracy for the transfiction of actually controlling through a jungle primary your vote. So it's just a disgrace. But right now, Steve Hilton is currently leading about 120,000 votes up on Javier Becerra out in California. It's looking like he might win the nomination as the first seed for the California gubernatorial race. And it's very, very interesting that Tom Steyer didn't do better than what he is right now. And I think that's because a lot of people are done with the hypocrisy of a billionaire trying to advocate for the common man. And we've seen that at the highest level in this administration. And I think liberals aren't that stupid where they're going to really believe a billionaire is going to advocate for environmental justice and all this other stuff when he spent his career getting billions and billions of dollars from the fossil fuel industry. And then you have this random out of nowhere left field, Javier Becerra, who's this random appointee during the Biden administration who was HHS secretary, which I don't know if you remember this viral moment. It was so funny. There was Joe Biden in one of those fake studios that he had during his administration, and he's up on the stage, and he's like, Xavier Baccaria, my HHS secretary, Xavier Baccaria. Xavier Becerra. And he had this really stupid moment, this, total Biden retard moment. And he's just up there on stage, and Javier's just standing off to the side, just like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And then that's what he used for this election to essentially buy his spot in the gubernatorial race. So then he used his failed resume as health secretary to become the governor's candidate. And then the guy who even picked him didn't even know his name. That's how irrelevant he is, and that's how most people see this guy. And then you have Steve Hilton, who hosted a Fox News show, and he was somebody who had owned prior businesses in the UK and America, a crowdfunding source for political candidates that could crowdsource for Democrats and Republicans during 2016 and 2020. And then you had Chad Bianco, Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco here. That's what he sounds like if you haven't heard this guy speak. And basically, he runs a very lackluster sheriff department in Riverside County. And this is the slate. I'm just giving you a brief of the California gubernatorial race because a lot of people don't know these candidates. A lot of them are irrelevant. And you think this would be different by now because California is the fourth largest economy in the world. They control essentially the United States economy, going through the Port of LA, going through San Francisco, going through San Diego. There's a lot of military might in California, even though a lot of the people there hate our military. And there is just so much at stake in this election. And then we have the big one, Spencer Pratt down in LA. And this is what really changed the tide for all of California, was his meteoric rise to potentially save California. And this is my take. This is my take from this election. Is no matter what happens in the gubernatorial race, Spencer Pratt is setting himself up to run for governor in 4 years in California. I think whoever gets in place, whether it's Hilton, whether it's Becerra, Baccaria, whatever his name is, sounds like a taco name, honestly. And then you have Steyer. He doesn't even have a shot. Whoever gets into place as California governor is most likely going to be a one-term governor, just because of how the state has been situated. The swing of Republicans is going up to 40%, is going to be a run for Spencer Pratt for governor, I believe, in 2028. Or no, it'd be 2030 at that point. I think Spencer Pratt is setting himself up for that election. So I think that is my take from there. But we have other topics we have to get to. I don't want this to take too long. This is our first episode back. It is our first consistent episode back. And I'm so excited, like I said in the beginning, to be back with you. But the Iran war has still not been settled. And I took a 3-month break from this show where I hadn't done jack shit. And the Iran war is still going on, and virtually nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Oil prices are still at record highs. We have the situation in the Middle East dissolving even further. We have Israel not helping with any of the peace negotiations. Should be red flag number one, right? Should be red flag number one. They're not helping with anything out there. And then we also have Marco Rubio saying the war's over. But then we have Donald Trump coming out every other day saying, oh, we almost have a negotiation in place. We'll have to see where it goes. So I have no idea. I have no clue where this war is going, or even if there is a war, or even if there's a Middle East at this point. I guess we don't know any of that. Does the Middle East even exist? We'll get Trump saying one day, I don't know if the Middle East exists anymore, because we're winning so much at home with $10 a gallon for gas. That's what winning looks like. This is the stuff you hear. You heard the other day he was outside of Marine One at the White House, and they were asking, sir, do you have any thought of Americans' economic repercussion playing into your decision? No, I don't really think about that. No, I'm just trying to solve the war. And it's like the war is not being solved. Did we forget about Ukraine and Russia? I feel like everybody has. There's still a war over there, by the way. And then we also have the Middle East, which is just totally crumbling. There is no negotiation. So then there's two options. You go in, you lay Operation Truth Nuke on them, and you take out Tehran, which I think is what Mark Levin would want. I think that's what Marco Rubio would even advocate for behind the scenes. And then you have the other option, which is pulling out completely, which I think would be a more J.D. Vance aligned option here, because he wants to save his shot at becoming a president in the future. And so those are really the two main options in the Middle East, is you either go in full force, Operation Truth Nuke, and take it out, or you back out, you work with the oil companies, and you drag the prices down. You regain the island that's in the strait that controls 60% of the oil supply that's coming out of Iran, and you walk away scot-free without losing Americans. You've lost 13 Americans so far in Operation Epic Fury. You count your losses, you get out of there, and you save the American oil and gas industry, essentially. And when you look at this war, Rubio said the other day, oh, it's over. It's completely done. What in reality is happening is America 250 is coming up in the nation's capital, and Trump has taken so much pride in rebuilding the city, rebeautifying it, all of this stuff, is this war is basically putting on hold until the end of the summer, which is going to make gas prices stay extremely high. It's going to make them even shoot up even further, especially once all of the travel of 4th of July happens. And I have a feeling, the worst hasn't been seen yet. Not to be a pessimist or a Debbie Downer, but I think that we are going to see the worst of it over this summer. It's going to be covered up by the America 250 celebrations. And so you look at the end of the summer, what is going to be the play? What is going to be the outlook? Well, nothing's going to happen in Iran. Ukraine and Russia is going to be at a standstill. We're working on a trade deal with China, and it's going to be resuming at step one, essentially at the beginning of 2025. That's where we're going to be at. And going into the midterms, is that a winning play? I think we all know the answer is no. And so when you look at all of those dynamics, the worst still has not yet to come. And I think there is a possibility of resuming fighting in Iran because they are left with those two options. Is either you take out Tehran or you take yourself out of involvement in the strait. because Iran is going to win that battle, because it's such a small and narrow strait that no matter what the United States does, Iran is going to have some type of control with it. So I believe the Iran war is still ongoing. It is still bigger and better than ever. If you want to put it in Trump's terms, that's how he would describe it. And I believe that the Iran war is not over, no matter what this administration has to say. It's always going to be ongoing. It's always going to be continuing. And the scapegoat and the almost hiding of this ongoing conflict is going to be ramped up in these next few months to distract the American public for America 250, among other things. So that's my take on the Iran war. We'll see where it goes. I'm sure there's going to be more news coming out soon, but I wanted to talk into that news that came out, what was it, yesterday or the day before, of saying there has been a stonewall in the negotiations, and I think that's going to be a long-term effect. So anyway, there's a war at home. There's a big war at home that we don't talk about, and this was something I had to see with my own two eyes about 2 weeks ago. Or actually, it was a week ago. I was with my buddy Riley Nemi, which, like I said, we're going to have on the show Friday, so you better tune in. It's going to be a great episode. There's going to be a lot talked about that has not been public yet, and this guy has been put through the ringer. But the homeless war that we have been dealing with at home has been something that I didn't really think was as big of an issue until I saw it with my two eyes. So we were in Santa Cruz about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and we go to this Costco, and they have this barbed wire military-esque fence outside the Costco. I was like, wow, Camp Pendleton's about 5 hours south. This cannot be Camp Pendleton. This is a Costco. This is what it says on Apple Maps, right? And then we show up, and this parking lot is surrounded by this military-grade fence. And we were with this city council candidate for Santa Cruz, and I was asking him, I was saying, so why is this Costco fortified better than some of our military bases? And he says, well, actually, Costco had to pay for it. They had to put it up because of all of these homeless people that were coming in and destroying their store, destroying the parking lot, destroying cars. And then I looked across the street, and there's this mine, and there's about 200 homeless people lining the street. You'd think it's a street parade. I was like, oh, Memorial Day passed, okay? This isn't the America 250 celebration anymore. And there's all these homeless people lining around this mine off to the other side. And then it's like a mine complex, and then it's a homeless housing unit. But then I look over at the homeless housing unit, and I've been to prestigious universities that are building new dorms. I've seen luxury apartments being built in the downtowns of these cities, and I haven't seen apartments this nice. I was like, wow, those apartments are really nice. I'm sure it's housing for the workers of the mine that, work across the street. No, it was housing for the homeless people that are supposedly not using drugs anymore. And so apparently that's what it's still being used for. So I talked to the city council candidate, and I said, okay, is this actually what it's being used for? And he says, no, what the homeless does is they go outside of this homeless encampment, essentially is what I'm going to call it, disguised as luxury apartments, and they sit out there and they beg the workers. They beg and plead, these social workers, which tend to be DEI hires, okay? I'm not going to lie. They were not the most beautiful workers. And so they beg and plead no matter what drugs they're on. They're shooting up with fentanyl, heroin, using coke, crack, all of these other things. And they beg them to come in. They beg them to let them stay. And eventually the workers cave because they get no support from the police. And so anyway, this was a graphic description of what I saw. And we were driving out of the Costco, and there's these tweakers in the street using fentanyl, falling over on the middle double line. And it was like dodging in Zombieland. I was playing a video game trying to dodge all of these homeless people in Santa Cruz. And I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, this is what the apocalypse looks like. This is why Hollywood made apocalyptic I don't have autism, guys. Okay, we have big autism in the White House on Monday. That's not going to be me, okay? You know what I was saying. Anyway, they have these scenes in Hollywood because of what these scenes are in these cities in California. It's no mistake. People were amputating themselves on the side of the road. They were missing limbs. They were having street fights. We saw all of this in the period of 20 minutes. And so there is an industrial complex out in California and many other Democrat-ran states and cities, and that's just the surface level of it. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, there has to be a solution to this. There has to be a solution to ending this insanity. And there totally is. There totally are many avenues where we could solve this. And we know Democrats never want to solve this. So it has to be done on a federal level. It has to be done on a federal level. And the unique situation about California is there is federal money that gets tapped into California at a higher rate going out of California than it is coming in. They have a surplus of state money going to the federal government instead of federal government money going to the state. And so there's a way that we could solve this industrial complex of homeless people, because there's a tier, there's a hierarchy, and there's all of this stuff. It's a mafia. It's a homeless mafia. And so there's a plan that could solve this so easily. And nobody has ever talked about it. Nobody in Congress has talked about it because I think they're scared. I think they're scared of a certain country that we may have heard of. They're scared of certain foreign agents, obviously. You see our politicians beckon to them all the time. Trump. And you just see this stuff all the time. But there's a way that we could solve it, and there's a way that we could solve it in a good way. Is that the American evangelical churches have been bought out by Israel, bought out by other countries, even Qatar, even China has gotten involved, even though they're majority atheists out there. All of these countries have bought into the American evangelical church circles because of their tax-exempt status, because of all of their economic precursors that they get to fall under American law. And so there's a sense of a way of money laundering there. And so here's how we could actually solve the homeless crisis and do it at a federal level. And I hope at least one congressman would at least do this in our Congress, is there needs to be a homeless reallocation of money going to our evangelical churches into the homeless industrial complex, but done through other nonprofits or other organizations that take this stuff seriously. And so my proposal is there could be a type of situation that could be occurring with federal law where if you're going to start an evangelical church, if you're going to start a Islamic church in our country, a synagogue, I don't care, any religion, Scientology, it would be a blanket coverage. You have to support the homeless community and other nonprofits that are working locally in that community in the first 3 years of that church being founded. And if you don't do that, you lose your tax-exempt status. And so for an example, there's 750,000 homeless people on the street every night in the United States. So this would take place in Republican states too, because there's states like Florida, Texas. In these big cities, they still have a homeless problem because of Democrats mostly, but also because of the situations that occur in big cities, right? The urban element of our country has fallen apart. And so it would take about $20 to $50 billion on conservative estimates to solve the homeless crisis. It would take $9 billion to basically house them in our country. So then a lot of that church revenue that would be taken in those first 3 years to ensure tax-exempt status would have to be reallocated to the homeless population. And if they don't do that at a high enough rate, then they lose that tax-exempt status. And I think this would be a good solution for solving the homeless problem because, one, it wouldn't stop any churches from their religious speech, any of the First Amendment stuff. And two, it would actually provide accountability to have a functional society back to our country. And this is the only business element in our country that operates differently from other nonprofits, other businesses, and has different ramifications under our tax code. So I think if we were able to utilize the church funding which has been overinflated in our country. I mean, you go to an evangelical church service and it's more set up than a rock concert, right? Obviously, we've seen all of these clips of people flying in on wires, of all of these other theatrics and shows that they bring into it. And then they talk about Jesus for about 3 minutes. And then they cite John 3:16 in the middle of the sermon. And then they walk out and do another 5 minutes of worship. And then you go out and get your free cafe coffee, you get your free meal, and then you go home and you feel all good about yourself. That's not how you get a religious revival in your country. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about they're using all of these scapegoats to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into media budgets, hundreds of thousands of dollars into pastor retreats, hundreds of thousands of dollars to trips to Israel, staying at luxury hotels. Let me think. Okay, if we're talking about benefit to our country and our religious spirit and all of this stuff, having free trips to Israel 5-star resorts and going to see the Holy Land would have to be lower on my list than helping the drug addict on the street that is making my quality of life horrible when I go out into public. I think having domestic responsibility and priorities has to be the topic of conversation when talking about our American spirit, our religious spirit in this country again. And it's been abandoned. It's been completely abandoned. It's only talking about bringing ourselves back to Christ-centeredness, which is an excuse of free funded taxpayer trips to Israel. And so I think there has been an over-obsession of Israel. I will admit that. I think there has been a complete over-obsession with Israel and everything that's been going on, but there's a justification there for it. This wouldn't be happening for no reason. There are issues that are resolved and started in Israel because of all of these repercussions that we've seen in our country. And so I just believe that's the first and number one way of how we could actually bring back domestic issues by reallocating funds from our religious apparatus in this country, because there's been so much fraud, waste, and abuse with it. And I did an episode of The Common Cause a while back where I went into FARA reports of all of the money being wired to the evangelical churches. Imagine the mosques. Imagine the synagogues. Imagine other religions in the United States. You really think it's just the evangelical churches that are money laundering foreign agent money into their apparatuses to fund media teams, pastor retreats, and trips to Israel? No, it's every church, because it's how the code's written. It's not because of the motives behind the actual churches. And the only way that this has been able to be perpetuated in our country was reformations to our church laws and to all the tax codes and other things such as that after 9/11. There's been a lot of underground reformation in that area that a lot of people haven't seen or a lot of people haven't talked about. So I believe it is essential that we start not to sound like a socialist or not to sound like a complete and total nut job, because there's going to be a lot of people from this episode saying, oh, you're a socialist, you're a national socialist even, you're this, you're that. But there has to be a reallocation of funds. There just does. And that's what Nick Shirley showed. When you stop fraud, waste, and abuse, there has to be a reallocation of that funds, because that's where the fraud, waste, and abuse is happening, embedded into infrastructure, embedded into all of these other social work programs. Reallocation of funds is not a socialist idea. In fact, it's a conservative idea at heart. Reallocating fraud, waste, and abuse into more conservative and more freedom-oriented models. But instead, it's been totally flipped on its head, because the conservative apparatus of our government has been turned into a progressive one, including in this Trump administration, with all of the social welfare programs. I don't think this is a conservative government, and if you think that too, you're misguided. Completely misguided. So I believe this is how we could take one step to solve the homeless problem, And I'm introducing it in a bite-sized way because I don't know all of the repercussions. And that's the one thing I will promise on this show is I'm not going to be the most eloquent on the law, on this, on that. But I'm going to be a tabling and a charter of ideas to hopefully be a mouthpiece to our lawmakers, be a mouthpiece from you to our lawmakers, to influencers, to people that actually have this leverage to be able to start promising solutions for the American people. And there's many other people in the broadcasting sphere like me. But I have a unique perspective of one, being this young, two, knowing a lot of these people that could start enacting this change, and three, actually having the know-with-all where I know for a fact that this could be implemented in some way. It just has to be figured out of what way. If there's a will, there's a way. And so that's where I'm going to leave that subject, because I think we could truly end this quickly, the homeless industrial complex. So thank you again for watching this episode of The Common Cause. I know towards the end there was a little bit of a Debbie Downer, but we have to solve this crisis, and I wanted to make sure that I could implement a policy and show that I'm a legit deal, okay? I'm not somebody who's just spitballing ideas. I'm going to lead solutions. So if you're watching this show, you're not just watching a commentary head spitballing a bunch of bullshit to your face. I'm going to actually come up with solutions, and I'm going to work tirelessly to come up with those solutions and ideas to be implemented for our lawmakers, because they don't even read the bills, guys. That's how bad our American politics are. They don't even read the bills. And so thank you again for tuning in for this first episode back to The Common Cause. It has truly been an honor today. It was a longer episode than I anticipated, but I'm just so ecstatic to be back with you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment to The Common Cause. Follow us on all platforms. You can listen through podcasts on Spotify, on everywhere you get your podcasts. You watch it primarily on YouTube. This is a live show pre-recorded that we will release on the same day of the recording of the episode. My name is Carson Carpenter. This is The Common Cause. And remember to put Jesus first and America only. Thank you. America is compromised. The mainstream media won't even touch certain topics. American churches are being bought out by Israel. Israel-backed PR campaign targets 38 Arizona churches. ICE is being attacked and assaulted in the streets. Man arrested for throwing Molotov cocktails at federal facility in brazen anti-ICE attack. College Republican vice presidents are being shot on college campuses. Alabama's Ella Cook killed in Brown University shooting. This is not an America I know and love, and isn't an America that I want to move into the future with. The American people have an air of grievance. This is your way to express it. We are the common cause, we are the common people, and we only put America first.